My name is Rebecca Shaefer. I'm a seventh generation of the Dulany family to live at Welbourne. Welbourne is currently a bed and breakfast. It's been operated for almost 100 years as a bed and breakfast. My great-grandparents started taking paying guests in the 1930s. Welbourne is 10 minutes west of Middleburg, Virginia, in the Piedmont Hunt Country. The original part of Welbourne was built of stone in around 1775. My family came in 1830, and by the time they got here, the original stone part had been added on to probably around 1810 with larger and more formal rooms. And then when our family came along, they added more embellishment. So they added 2 end wings. Somewhere along the line, the house got stuccoed so that the original stone and then the brick additions all had a uniform look to them. At some point, a front porch with columns was added. Balustrades were added around the top of the 2 end wings. And the style is now known as Greek Revival. Daniel Dulany the Elder is my 7th great-grandfather. He came over from Ireland in 1701. He had a couple of wives. I think the first 1 or 2 died. Then he married Rebecca Smith. There are 2 portraits behind me. One is my 6th great-grandmother, Rebecca Tasker Dulany. Then across from her is the portrait of her husband, my 6th great-grandfather, Daniel Dulany the Younger, who was the mayor of Annapolis. They had a grandson named Benjamin Tasker Dulany, who apparently was mad, and there are lots of crazy stories about him walking down the stairs in the middle of his wife's dinner party wearing nothing but his sword around his waist. Needless to say, that marriage ended in divorce, which was extremely uncommon at the time. His son, John Peyton Dulany, and Marianne de Butts Dulany bought Welbourne in 1830. They named it after Marianne's family home in Lincolnshire, England, which was called Welbourne Hall.
Hi, I'm Travis Shaw. I'm the Director of Education for the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area. The history of Welbourne, like the history of many historic houses here in Northern Virginia, is really inextricably tied with the American Civil War. At the start of the war, the owner of the home, Richard Henry Dulany, raises a company of cavalry for service in the Confederate Army. But by the end of the war, he's in command of the 7th Virginia Cavalry. And as a colonel, he's going to be fighting with the regiment through a number of different actions during the Civil War and is actually wounded on several occasions. One of the most remarkable artifacts I have here at the house is the uniform coat that he was wearing during one of those actions. And you can actually see where he was wounded. During the course of the war, a number of well-known figures are going to visit Welbourne. One of the most famous is Major John Pelham. Pelham was a young artillery officer. He's the chief of Jeb Stuart's horse artillery and really has a reputation for being kind of a youthful, very handsome young man, very brave as well. He has the nickname the Gallant Pelham. And in the fall of 1862, he will stay here at Welbourne as the Confederate Army is making its way south after the Battle of Antietam. If you go into the parlor, you can see on the window pane, he had etched the name of his aide-de-camp and was actually in the middle of etching his own name when Mary Dulany called the officers into the dining room. So kind of got caught in the act, but it's a really incredible personal artifact of his. The very next day, Pelham is going to be in action during the Battle of Unison, would continue to serve in the Confederate Army until the spring of 1863, when he was mortally wounded. So some of the other famous names that are associated with the house during the Civil War, we know Jeb Stuart. stayed here. Probably the most frequent visitor is going to be John Mosby. John Mosby was a Confederate officer who ran a group of partisan rangers, kind of guerrilla fighters here in this part of Northern Virginia, attacking the Union Army where it's vulnerable, kind of hit and run ambush attacks across this area, so much so that the area earns a reputation or a nickname as Mosby's Confederacy, an area where, if Union troops are entering, they need to be aware that Mosby and his men are a potential threat. One of the reasons why they're so effective at this type of warfare is that many of the homes in the area serve as safe houses for him and his men. So after these hit and run raids, they have a place to kind of disappear before reappearing for their next attack. And Welbourne is going to serve as one of those safe houses. One of the most often repeated stories that I hear about Welbourne revolves around one of these actions. One of the Dulany family cousins was a ranger, and he's staying here at Welbourne when Union soldiers appear searching for Mosby's men. They're going to search these safe houses trying to find these guys. And very quickly, he is going to be hidden under the mattress in one of the bedrooms upstairs. So as the Union soldiers are searching the house on room by room, they finally come to the bedroom and they see the children peacefully sleeping in bed. They're kind of scolded to be quiet and not wake the children, not knowing that two of Mosby's men are actually hiding under the mattress, underneath the sleeping children. And so they were able to escape capture that night because of the quick thinking of the Dulany family. So because of the Confederate sympathies of most of the families in this part of Loudoun County, this area is going to be subject to a lot of raids by Union cavalry. They're coming through not only looking for Mosby's men, but they're also taking all of the things that Mosby's men could use, livestock, horses, food, and so forth. They're also going to be, on some occasions, taking personal objects. We know that here at Welbourne, the family actually managed to save most of the family silver by burying it in what turned out to be a recently dug grave. One object, though, was taken. One of the pieces of silver, a silver tumbler, was actually left on the dumbwaiter. And so that was the one piece that was taken during the war. And so the family had an exact replica of one of those tumblers made to replace the one, as it says, taken by a Yankee officer in 1862. Now, this is the same family silver that guests actually get to dine with when they stay here at Welbourne. It has the Dulany crest on it.
In the late 1800s, my great-great-great-uncle Hal, who was a son of Colonel Dulany, did the grand tour of Europe and bought a lot of religious art in the school of Raphael. Well, one of the paintings he bought at an exhibition in Paris, and he wasn't able to pick up the painting until after the exhibition was over. So he went to the studio of the artist and to pick up his painting, and the artist asked him if he could keep the painting a little bit longer because a representative from the Tsar had been to see him and wanted to have him paint it for him in life size. So the family joke is that we have the original and the Tsar has the copy. The parlor is the room, I think, that gets more use than any room in the house as the guests gather there for drinks before dinner and often after dinner. And I've often thought that if I could only be a fly on the wall during some of the conversations that have taken place in that room over the last 200 years, the stories those walls could tell. That room was built in 1810, so we're looking at, well over 200 years of conversation.
So the house has a really rich literary history as well, and it all goes back to Elizabeth Lemons. She's a granddaughter of Colonel Richard Dulany. She grows up here at Welbourne. She lives here for most of her life. And she is at a party in Princeton, New Jersey, and has this kind of chance meeting with a guy named Max Perkins. Max Perkins is one of the real literary giants of American 20th century literature. He's an editor for Scribner's. He's got all these connections with really the most famous names of the Jazz Age. Helps discover a lot of authors, including Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald. And they strike up this really incredible relationship that lasts for decades. I kind of like to think of it as an intellectual affair, where they're writing letters back and forth. They're discussing not just their personal lives, but these authors, their works, Max's job with Scribner's. And at one point he approaches her. He's been working with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald had, as most of us know, issues with drinking and kind of affecting his work, affecting his creativity and his ability to produce literary works. And so she actually works with Perkins to get Fitzgerald to come out here to Welbourne as kind of a break from the hustle and bustle of the city life and this kind of fast-paced lifestyle he's been living, in the hopes that it helps kind of rekindle his creative spirit. So he actually spends time out here at Welbourne, and that ends up turning into a short story, Her Last Case, which revolves around someone visiting the Virginia hunt country, really paints this very vivid portrait of the community out here in Loudoun County. This kind of landscape of fox hunting and Civil War battlefields and grand historic estates. So this really serves as a literary refuge for Fitzgerald, and it works out so well that one of Perkins' other clients will come out here as well, and that's the author Thomas Wolfe. Wolfe is probably most famously known for his work, Look Homeward, Angel. And like Fitzgerald, his visit ends up becoming a literary work, in this case a play, about the house at Malvern. And in it, there is a house that kind of serves almost as a character in the story. The house is named Malvern, so obviously directly drawn from this house. And again, a very lively portrait of what it's like living out here during the Jazz Age. He describes the house as being very full of life, very homey, but at the same time, there's kind of this bittersweet sadness to it. He says something along the lines of, it's haunted by a ghost of times foregone, kind of this looking back at the past in a very bittersweet way, which I think really is a great description of Welbourne. It is this house that's so full of life, it's so warm, it feels so very homey, but there's always this kind of look at backwards at the past and the many people who've graced this house over the years.
About 30 years ago, we had an historic mason up here from Charlottesville who had worked on Poplar Forest and Monticello, and we needed to have our chimneys rebuilt because they were, at least the parts above the roof line that were exposed, were brick on brick. The mortar had all disintegrated. When the mason arrived, he asked me where the closest stream bed was. And I thought, okay, so he wants to go for a swim. Well, it is a hot day. And he said, no, I'm actually just going to get sand to make the mortar, because that's where the sand would have come to make the mortar for these chimneys. So he went to the stream and then used that sand to make the mortar to rebuild the chimneys. Anyway, so while he's on the roof, he's looking down the chimney line to this room and the room next to it. And he said, I know that you have 2 fireplace openings, but there are 3 flues. And so we said, well, we know there's a fireplace in the parlor and there's a fireplace in the bedroom above it, but those are the only 2 fireplaces. He said, well, you have another fireplace. So it turns out this room that we're in right now had a fireplace, and up until about 30 years ago, we never even knew. So we did some excavation and broke into the wall and found the fireplace and opened it up, and we use it, and it's a great fireplace. A couple of years ago, we needed to have a chimney relined, so I engaged a local mason to consult me on how we should go about lining these 200-year-old chimneys. And he and I spent about 4 hours walking around the house, and I learned more than I ever knew was possible about historic masonry. At any rate, in this particular room, in the music room, he found a piglet print on one of the bricks in the fireplace. He explained to me how bricks were fired, 150 years ago. The bricks would have been made in the spring and then sat outside all summer to cure, and then the house would have been built with those bricks in the fall. Well, during the summer, while the bricks were curing, they were in a barnyard, say, and subject to all kinds of interference from any barnyard animals, birds, dogs, and in our case, piglets running across the bricks. There are many layers to Welbourne's history, of course, going back to the late 1700s. But of course, the history never stops, and in the current day, there are activities and events that have long traditions here, and of course, we're always making new ones. A long-standing tradition at Welbourne that started in 1962 is our summer stickball game. And there's a plaque on the front porch with the winners of every season of stickball since 1962. My father and uncle grew up in New York City, and stickball was a street game played with a broomstick and a spalding, which is a small pink ball about the size of a tennis ball. Lacking a spalding, we now use a tennis ball and play stickball from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend every summer. Neighbors and friends come from far and wide, as they have been doing since the early 60s. There are 3 teams, and they have been engaged in a friendly battle for the last 50, almost 60 years. An annual event that takes place in September is our jazz party that is put on by the Goose Creek Jazz and Ragtime Society that was formed right here in this room back in 1974. My grandfather, who was born in 1907, was raised on the traditional jazz, or the New Orleans style jazz, of the teens and 20s. My father grew up with this jazz in the 40s, and this was, for him, the contemporary music that he was raised on. And when my grandfather died in the 1970s, we had a memorial service for him. So we hired a jazz band, and as they're walking into the church, they play a slow, funereal, dirge-like music. After the service, of course, the departed has gone on to meet his maker, and he's over in the glory land. At which point, the jazz band turns around, heads out of the church, and plays upbeat, foot-stomping, banjo strumming tunes, and everybody is celebrating that the departed is in heaven. So we come back to Welbourne. We roll back the rug in this room and dance all night long. And at the end of the night, there were 6 or 7 couples sitting around and said, "This music is the greatest music ever. How do we share this with our friends?" That was the night that the GCJRS was formed. And every year since 1974, we have hosted a jazz party. We usually get about 800 people, and we dance the night away on the front lawn to the same tunes that my grandfather was raised on. When guests arrive, we want them to feel at home, perhaps as though they've come to their grandmother's house. As such, we tell them to make themselves at home. They can sit in the parlor and have a drink. They can sit on the porch and read a book. They can build a fire in the library and read from our vast library, probably 10,000 books. For breakfast, we serve a hearty Southern breakfast with grits and bacon and eggs and biscuits, and it's all served on the family silver, family china, family linens. So while Welbourne is our private home and we do open it as a bed and breakfast, we also host a number of events, mostly locals, everything from family reunions to weddings. We love to be part of the community and share Welbourne with our neighbors and friends.